Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Sterling Davis. I am with Ethosity Property Management as well as BRIA, Black Real Estate Investor Association. We want to thank you for joining us as well as you're subscribing from Investhouse. Thank you for just participating with us. I am so excited to be here today with our guest, Alexa Lomax. I keep on saying Foy. Alexa Lomax is with us today to discuss Airbnb. Hey, Alexa.
Hey,
Well, welcome. Let's just dive in. Tell a little bit about who you are and how you got into real estate.
thanks for the introduction. I first piqued my interest for real estate when I was back in elementary school. I probably went to more open houses than I did field trips. It just became something that was fun to do after my mom purchased her first house. Once we started going to ample open houses, I'm like, so this is our Saturday thing. So even after we purchased our home, it's something that we continue to do. I really enjoyed looking at the interior design that everyone did in their homes, the price points, the neighborhoods. That all just really intrigued me. And that's an interest that stuck with me all the way up until I graduated high school. So during college, what I did was multifamily. That's where I started off at with Barrett and Stokely. And it was great. It was a great introduction into property management and real estate itself. I worked with a few different apartments with them, and so was able to kind of get the hang of what property management was in the sense of pricing and leasing, the basics of management. And from there, I ended up taking a trip to Colombia in South America, and it was during that time that I stayed in my first Airbnb. This was in 2016, so the idea of Airbnbs and short-term rentals were still new to me. So I was definitely very skeptical of it, but wanted to take the chance after reading through several reviews of the place I was going to book. I decided to book the Airbnb over the hotel, basically because I'm going to a place I'm unfamiliar with. I don't know anybody. I don't know the language. So having a sense of community was very important for me. So it was in South America that it really piqued my interest for Airbnb itself and the concept of a short-term rental. The experience was a lot different than staying at a hotel. We came home, we would cook at night. We used our kitchen. The Airbnb we stayed at was a shared space, so we rented a room. We had our own bedroom and a bathroom, and there was other people from other countries that were staying there along with the Airbnb host. So the Airbnb host was able to give us pointers on where to visit in the city, what's there to do around there. So because of that experience, I came back, I was talking about it with who the owner of the company of Baron Stokely, and he was very intrigued, and that's kind of how it all opened up. He ended up purchasing some properties, wasn't sure what to do with it, and I suggested, let's try Airbnb it out. So it was at that time I took a full-fledged in it, did a lot of research, started talking to other Airbnb hosts, and that's when I staged, set it up after he acquired these properties, and we got going with Airbnb. But part of the things that I realized when first starting Airbnb is the money it takes to start it up. I think the initial investment cost. So it's definitely, I'm not the one who purchased this. I was just managing the property. However, I was, purchasing all of the furniture and all the amenities and whatnot that you needed to start the Airbnb. So it definitely was something that was very eye-opening to see. That was my first investment property that I had worked with specifically.
No, that's really cool. That's really cool to kind of understand as well as to be able to start off and stay in a place where it's like co-living is pretty interesting in itself, right? So let's pivot a little bit. I think that opens up the door to understanding what Airbnb is, and like we hear Airbnb so much, and it's almost like like band-aids or these things that we just kind of represent as the general idea of the whole market. But what is Airbnb and VRBO? And can you explain a little bit?
So Airbnb is a short-term rental. It is meant for someone who's planning to stay somewhere anywhere from one night up to 3 months. Really anywhere after 3 months, you start to consider it more of a long-term rental process. So with short-term rentals, there's multiple platforms that you can use to book a stay. Airbnb in my opinion, is just the most popular one that has kind of been more widespread. Prior to Airbnb, we did have other vacation rentals such as VRBO, HomeAway, and those were starting more as timeshares that kind of transitioned to short-term rentals as Airbnb became a thing.
That's really interesting. So as we we talk about these throughout this conversation, we might say Airbnb, but what we mean in general is short-term rental. So that could be VRBO, it could be all those that you just named. So I don't want people to think just in generic terms that we're talking about specifically one over another, but we might mention Airbnb just because it's the most popular one here in the United States, in Indiana. So tell us a little bit about, right? So as we start working in as a Airbnb person, I want to start investing. What does it mean to be like a host, and how would someone get started at becoming like part of Airbnb and becoming a short-term rental like agent, I guess?
So there's two different ways you can become a host with Airbnb. Personally, for myself, I became a host by being a property manager for short-term rentals. So, that's always a route where you can actually purchase or rent the property and host it yourself. To be a host just means that you are the direct contact with this person who is renting your short-term rental. You're going to be responsible for setting it up, creating the listing, and managing the day in and day outs of the Airbnb. It is a very time-consuming thing to be a host. You constantly want to be looking at the notifications on your phone. Anytime throughout the night, guests may need something, a toilet may be clogged, there may be a water leak, all the way to scheduling the turns. So after the tenant leaves their stay, getting the cleaner in the next day, or if you're the one cleaning it to save money, that's all of the kind of the bubble of being a host for Airbnb or short-term rentals in general.
No, that's excellent. Because as you start becoming a host, being having one property or multiple properties, you can start growing to something called a super host. Tell us a little bit about that.
And so being a super host means you've gotten a set amount of 5-star reviews from the people who have stayed in your Airbnb or short-term rental. These 5-star reviews are not easy to keep up. People are very, very specific about what they want when they're renting a property for a short-term stay. So some of the things that you to do to ensure you're getting that 5-star review is just being very specific in your listing, and the rules that you have for your Airbnb. So to maintain a super host status, I think it's all about how specific and upfront you are from the beginning. For example, there was a Airbnb that I managed, and it was 5 bedrooms, but the 5th bedroom was in addition to the master suite. So I wanted to make sure I was clear ahead of time that if you're expecting 5 bedrooms, just know you have to walk through the master suite to get to this additional 5th bedroom. So it's all about how specific you are, because this is someone's vacation. I think that vacations are taken very seriously. And you not being specific about something can blow somebody's experience. To maintain a super host status, it's all about the experience that you're able to provide. In addition to that, for example, I had a home that had pretty bad Wi-Fi. And so I was able to explain in the listing, you can stream things, but your entire family in this 5-bedroom home cannot stream everything up front. So that way they know coming in, this is not a good place if you're coming as a team trying to do work in this home. This probably isn't a good place if you guys all like to watch different Netflix and YouTube channels in your separate bedrooms. So those things being very upfront about are going to help elevate you to that super host status, because the more information you're able to give up front, the better reviews you get in the end because you align the expectations for the stay.
Yeah, so I mean that's pretty good. Like setting expectations, it's pretty ideal. I mean, I stay in my fair share of Airbnbs, and I have really good experience and I have really bad ones. And I start looking for people that are super hosts, right? Like people that are constantly getting those 5 stars, because I don't have time on my vacation to figure out that this is not what is advertised, right? Like I want to make sure that the experience that I'm having is one that is pleasurable and relaxing, right? So I've left Airbnbs because the expectation was not met somewhere down the line, and then you're backtracking and you're losing money not only for the stay, but you're losing because you're going to be trying to give some deposit back or whatever
Mhm.
that is to give, make sure that it's a pleasurable experience in which that you probably could have prevented in the first place, right? Um, so when we start looking at like the Airbnb short-term rentals, you as somebody that has such a wide range and expertise in long-term and short-term, what do you kind of see? If I was a short-term rental like investor, what would you tell me as like the benefits over the long term?
So I've had the joy of being able to work in both the short term and currently I'm a long-term property manager with Authenticity. So I've had the joy of being able to see the benefits and the downfalls of both of them. And I would say the biggest benefit to having a short-term rental is the uncapped income. So if you have a long-term rental, say your unit rents for $1,000, it's predictable. You know, every month you should be getting that $1,000 rent. However, with Airbnb, you could have $1,000 weekend, depending on what's going on in your city. So the benefits of having a short-term rental is it's unmaxed, you know, the amount of people that can rent your home and even the pricing. For example, during the Indy 500, you know, I'm very aware of the events that were coming to town. So I'd be, you know, very cautious about what I priced and when I priced. So, you know, keeping the calendar of the events that are coming in your city to know where you can price your unit to maximize that income. So for Indy 500, there was a 2-bedroom apartment that I was managing, and we were able to get $500 a night. And a long-term rental, we can't fluctuate that. You know, we just would have gotten our $1,000 for the month. So some of the pros and cons between long-term and short-term. With long-term rental, you know, there's less management, predictable income. You don't have to furnish it. You don't keep the utilities in your name. However, with the short-term rental, the utilities are in your name. So, you know, you're responsible for the usage and, you know, the heat and the air, the water that goes out from the Airbnb tenants. You are also responsible for, you know, any damages. So let's say you own your home that you're renting out. Let's say someone clogs the toilet and now you have to pay for a plumber to come out and get that unclogged, et cetera. So there are definitely some benefits to both of them and downfalls. I think with Airbnb, it's more of a diverse risk. You always have some place to stay when you're renting. So let's say that we have an Airbnb in Florida, you know, that gives you a guaranteed place to go stay. Even downtown Indianapolis. So, you know, where I was renting majority of my Airbnbs, I was able to go, you know, stay in those whenever the nights were open. You also don't have to worry about evictions, someone losing their job, um, not being paying late. You know, the Airbnb payments come timely. As soon as the tenant leaves, you get your payment dispersed to you immediately afterwards, unless there's some sort of dispute. So those are kind of like the pros and cons of having an Airbnb versus a long-term rental.
No, that's really helpful. I mean, I think that's as an investor, I mean, it's huge being able to take advantage of what I call the market, right? Like, you know,
Mhm.
with inside of long-term rentals, we can only take advantage of the market every time the lease comes up for renewal. So if the market changes in that given year or that 2 years, that's the only time that we can sort of take advantage of the market. Airbnb, you can take advantage of that market so frequently. It's pretty cool. I think you did a great job at explaining that. So as we start looking and exploring and evaluating properties now, like, all right, as an investor, I'm sold on the Airbnb thing. How would you, you know, explain to me to determine, you know, a home, how it fits inside of a criteria, right? Like, what does that kind of look like? And you know, can you explain a little bit?
So people generally, if you say you're a real estate investor, it's a popular question to hear how many doors do you have? With Airbnb, it's a little bit different. I would say the question would be how many rooms do you have? So it's all about how many people you're able to sleep within a home. The more people you're able to sleep, the more money and potential income you can get from this home. You know, you have your set rate and then you also charge per head. So in addition to how many doors do you have, let's say we have a 1-bedroom home that's renting for $1,000 a month on a month-to-month basis. With long term for Airbnb, we may have a 1-bedroom home with 5 bedrooms, and that 5 bedrooms may generate an additional $100 per night for us. So that's something that I think is very
Five beds,
crucial when
you're saying?
picking. Yeah.
Okay, yeah, gotcha.
So that's something that's very crucial when picking the criteria for your Airbnb is maximizing the number of guests that you can get to stay there, whether that's putting, bunk beds in a single room to fit more people in there. So I look for, the bedrooms and the space, like the living space, the dining space. Can we have an area for the guests to eat? Because these are all amenities that people will look for when booking a space. I think that location is also key. You want to be in a spot that's near the convention center or near a place where people come to travel within your city. If you have an Airbnb in Florida, you want to try and get as close to the beach as possible, knowing that that's what people's intentions are when going to Florida. With Indiana, I think the closer you are to the convention center, closer you are to all of our event centers like the Lucas Oil, or even the baseball fields, that's where you're going to maximize your income at, because that's mainly what people are traveling here for. I think proximity is also a huge thing. Like if you're going to be the one doing the turns and keeping up with the day-to-day management, you want to be in a close proximity to be able to get to that Airbnb within a good time, to where it's not draining for you to have to make trips back and forth, because you do make a lot of constant trips, especially if you have multiple nights booked per week. I think another thing to add to your criteria is knowing the law for the area. For example, Las Vegas does not allow you to have Airbnbs, and I think that's for good reason. They push everyone to the Strip. They want everyone to stay on the Strip and spend their money there, and so they ban Airbnbs in the city itself. So you can't rent outside of the Strip. I know other surrounding areas of Las Vegas, like Henderson and some of the smaller cities, are now starting to allow Airbnbs. But that's something you definitely want to be mindful of when it comes time to purchasing your property, is knowing what the laws are in that area, because that can definitely affect your purchase. Try and find a place that's also able to rent all year round. I think that Florida is somewhere constantly have good weather, so you're going to have a better occupancy rate than here in Indiana, where in January and February, when it's known for us to have snowfalls and winter storms, you definitely do see an increase in your vacancy. So it's definitely something you want to consider, especially when it comes time to calculating your expenses. Am I going to have tenants staying here that month to help compensate for what I'm paying out?
What would you say is a good number of days in a given month if my rental property be occupied?
The rule of thumb for short-term rentals is 60 to 80% of the month.
Okay.
So I prefer to see around 20 days booked. And at that, depending on what it is, you're going to be able to get a different rate for each one of those days. So I think rule of thumb, if you're looking between 60, 80%, you're in a golden place.
No, that's some good gems right there. I mean, I think it's really important. We come across different people and investors all the time that's asking about short term, and they're like, "Hey, I got this one in Newcastle," and it's like, "What's the attraction in Newcastle?" Right? Like, I have this attraction here, and it's like, what is the draw? Right? Like now you're only 12 days out of the month that we were probably going to get it rented. You should just go to long term, right? So no, I think that's really helpful. I thought something that would be interesting to the viewers is like last year, what kind of transition did you see like with COVID and like hospitals and things like that when it came to short-term rentals?
And so we actually started to set up an Airbnb right before COVID happened last year. It was beginning of February when we acquired a home that was going to be put on the market for Airbnb. And I think that COVID last year versus COVID this year are completely different. Last year was unsure what this thing was. People weren't traveling. The lockdowns were extreme versus this year, even though, we're still in the pandemic, people are taking a little bit more risk and getting out and traveling and starting to push themselves out there more. So last year, I think there was a lot of uncertainty for those who had a short-term rental, not knowing what to expect with this somewhat new market. So we just saw Airbnb make a quick pivot on how they can continue to make profit during this time. So you saw them start to change their one-night listings to sometimes 3-month listings, and starting to get more of like that in between short-term and long-term rentals. So those are some of the transitions that you saw Airbnb and other short-term rentals making last March when things started to close down. And we also saw Airbnb open it up to nurses. So nurses could go, and doctors and those who worked in healthcare could go onto Airbnb and get a very hefty discount if they wanted to go straight from the hospital to an Airbnb, so they didn't have to go home and infect their family. Airbnb seemed to be a cushion for those who worked in the medical field during COVID. So I think that Airbnb has continued to try and pivot to work within what's going on with the world. But I think right now we've seen things kind of transition back to where they were a year prior to COVID. People are more than ever now wanting to get out and travel and be out. And so I think, long term for Airbnb, we definitely do see things starting to pick back up and be where they were prior to COVID happening, just because of, people are starting to get vaccinated and, feeling more confident in their travel abilities.
No, that's excellent. Like, I can see that even for myself, right? Like, we're traveling. We have so many things on the calendar this year that we didn't have last year, right? We're the next month we're going to be in 4 different states, right, with travel baseball and things, right? So I understand that. So how about let's talk about a little bit about some of those resources that you use as we start talking about evaluating properties, but some of those resources that you use as a manager / investor that could be helpful for somebody that was going to start looking at these properties.
I think you just need to figure out how you can scale your Airbnb or short-term rental best as possible. For me personally, I found doing so by taking advantage of all of these ancillary apps that Airbnb has, like Turnly. So as soon as my tenant for the night would vacate from the property and they stated that they were gone, my Turnly app would then get communicated with from Airbnb to let my cleaner know that she's okay to go into that property and start the turn. And then she would be able to clock for the next tenant to come in, for the next guest to come in, tenant and guest. I think another thing that is very useful is combining your calendars. So if you're one that wants to take advantage of having a VRBO, HomeAway, and Airbnb, if your location allows for that, I think that, combine your calendars. Calendly, not calendar, there's an app that allows you to combine all of your stays to where if it's booked on one platform, the other platform will now block that off. So being able to combine your platforms that way would definitely maximize your income, because some people may prefer to rent from HomeAway over Airbnb, so you're able to target both of those guests. So I think that being able to maximize by using the apps that are allowed from Airbnb and integrate with their platform are going to be what sets you ahead with that.
No, that's excellent. That's excellent. I mean, I think being able to understand and leverage technology, I always tell people when I first got into property management long term, my leveraging of technology is what made me be able to grow from 0 doors to X amount of doors so quickly, because a lot of it was antiquated, and what they're doing is basically giving you those controls that you can work at your you're back and you can work quicker, I guess. So with understanding specific, let's talk about like markets, right? You touched on it a little bit about the indie market, how it's transitioning back to where it is, but also let's talk about some of your favorite places inside of indie that you see growth and development for Airbnbs.
So I really enjoy the Fountain Square Bates Hendricks area. I have found that that has been a prime location for the Airbnbs I manage that do the best. You typically have 3 to 4 bedroom homes, so you can maximize the number of guests that you have staying there. It's an ideal location. You're really close to the convention center. You're close to all of our event spaces downtown. You're also walking distance to all of the festivities within Fountain Square. So, we're able to boast on, what's walkability. You can walk to Kuma's Corner, some of these restaurants in the area. So I think Bates Hendricks and Fountain Square easily would be a place where if I was going to start an Airbnb today, that's where I'd be looking for properties. Some of these rural areas are actually starting to pick up in Airbnbs as well. We see Airbnb starting to be used for, event space as well. I was talking to a friend that manages Airbnbs out in McCordsville, and this Airbnb specifically has a nice yard space. So she's had people renting this venue space as a venue, for weddings and baby showers. And that's, opening yourself up to a whole nother stream of revenue, because at that point, you may be able to only rent it out for days at a time, from 12 to 5. So you're just opening yourself up to more options being out in rural areas. So that's definitely something that I would also consider looking into. It's done well for her out in McCordsville. But what I'm familiar with is the Bates Hendricks downtown Fountain Square area. I think that's definitely a desired area. One thing that I was shocked about was I did manage a Airbnb close to Broad Ripple. I thought that, being near the Broad Ripple area is kind of up and coming. That's where some people would, desire to stay. But it really just didn't do as well as the properties that we had downtown. I think that, a downtown anywhere is going to be a popular place to be. I think if you're in a central place of the city, you can't go wrong.
No, that's really interesting to be able to, because I would think, right, like Broad Ripple's established. It's, it has high home values too, right? So I would think, and it has bars that it would do really well. But you start looking at like the difference between that and Fountain Square, where it has, I say, like it has culture though. Like Fountain Square becomes a destination. So that's always something to kind of keep in mind when you start evaluating. I mean, we in the long-term rentals always look at properties at like A, B, C, and D neighborhoods. Would you say like short-term rentals do better inside of neighborhoods that have more owner occupied, people, or more like rentals and more in those C and D areas?
There's definitely a sweet spot. So you definitely don't want to be in a C and D neighborhood, a neighborhood that's and still in the developing stage, because people are coming from out of town and they don't know the neighborhood. So they're expecting you to be able to provide a safe space. And if someone comes to town and they see, drug deals happening across the street, that's just going to, blow your experience. And I think what you have to keep in the front of your head with Airbnb, it's all about the experience. So I would absolutely focus on A and B neighborhoods where you can guarantee the safety and guarantee the experience for those who are in your place. I think if you go to A neighborhoods, neighborhoods where you're actually in these subdivisions, you also face the neighbors not wanting you to be there. So there was a time to where we had an Airbnb that was actually in a subdivision, and we got multiple complaints from the surrounding neighbors of the traffic that was coming in and out. One person throwing a party, which are all things that you risk when having an Airbnb that you really can't control. So the neighbors eventually were able to bring this to HOA, and we had to close the Airbnb of this neighborhood. So I think that, around a B-class neighborhood, which is typically, a completely renovated street in Fountain Square, I think would be considered a B-class neighborhood. That would be ideal destination for Airbnb.
No, absolutely. No, that makes 100% sense, right? Like when we start looking at evaluating what neighborhoods work and what doesn't work. Let's start, like, I don't want to keep you too long. I really appreciate you taking the time here. I know we try to do the live, and I appreciate you adapting with me. Let's start looking at like when I start preparing for the property and how I should stage the property, and looking at what are some of the pitfalls that you've seen as an investor. Yep. Yep, absolutely. When you start looking, like we start talking about preparing for the property, how do you start preparing when it comes to staging the property, what you put in there, as well as some of the pitfalls that you've seen investors make when they're preparing for it?
So, it all starts if there's a difference between purchasing a home for Airbnb and renting out an apartment or an arbitrage for Airbnb. For those that are actually purchasing the home, dig deep into this inspection. Like I said, it's all about the experience. So if you know that there's some deferred maintenance that you're walking into, making sure that that is all taken care of prior to you opening it up to guests to come stay. One of the that you have if you're renting out an apartment for Airbnb is being able to use their maintenance. So that's something that you definitely have to keep in mind when you're renting a home that you own as an Airbnb property. So some of the things that I think people miss out on is the fact that things are going to occur with your guests being there. So making sure that you have your eggs, your ducks in a row prior to them being there. One thing that I always make sure to do prior to listing the property is stay there for a couple of nights myself. I'm showering there, I'm flushing the toilets there, I'm cooking there, so I can get that full experience to ensure that this is adequate for a guest to come stay there. So, make sure that this is somewhere where you would like to stay yourself, because if you're not enjoying your own experience, neither will one of your guests coming in. I think that purchasing your furniture from a more quality place will also add benefits to your Airbnb versus going and getting. I love IKEA, I personally get it for my home, but with your purchasing IKEA furniture for a place that has high traffic, people coming in and out, possibly families and kids staying there, make sure that you get furniture that's going to last you, that's not easy to break. And sometimes IKEA furniture just doesn't hold up the quality that Airbnb or short-term rentals require out of it. So one thing that I like to source when I'm staging an Airbnb is using Facebook Marketplace. Facebook Marketplace opens you up to a slew of different brands and furniture that people are selling, and it's usually at a nice discounted rate to be able to purchase and place it in there and get quality furniture. I also utilize flea markets. So flea markets tend to have nice decor that to put in there at a low cost. I also did something called GPO, which is a group purchasing organization. So when setting up an Airbnb, if I was doing multiple at a time, I would reach out to Airbnb hosts who were interested in doing GPO. So if I know, Lily is setting up an Airbnb, we can go in together and purchase items at a wholesale cost, so we can get higher quality at a lower rate. So reaching out to some of these sites like Alibaba and AliExpress, and ordering some of their better quality stuff at a lower rate really allows for you to get the better quality at a lower price. So, you're maximizing your income coming in immediately.
No, that's that you're dropping some gems on here, for sure. When you start looking at and understanding that this is a commercial space, right? Like this isn't. One time I went and I was talking to my wife, and I was like, I'm gonna get a lawnmower so I can start cutting grass. So I just went to Lowe's, started getting a lawnmower, thinking that I'm about to go start cutting these grass. And some of our grass, it's up to our knees. And it's like that lawnmower didn't last like 5 trims, and that thing was like broken down, right? Because it wasn't made for that. It was made for like a consistent cut that's going to happen on a every weekly basis. It wasn't made for like the run over the liquor bottle that just got thrown out on the side of the road on accident, right? So it's really understanding and changing that demographic and understanding that this is a commercial space. You need it to be durable, because that's part of that experience that you were talking about, right? Like walking into a property that looks dingy because it just has wear on it, is part of why you want to use good furniture, right? Is making sure of it, right? So no, that's really helpful. As we start looking at we're preparing those properties, is there any way that we can mitigate, damages or anything like that when it comes to these crazy, college kids that just using your Airbnb for a party?
Yeah, so there's ways that you can get around or trying to minimize that. And it's typically if you set your calendar to allow people to, on the weekends, rent a minimum of 2 nights. I think that when someone rents 2 nights, they're less likely to be renting the place just for a party. So if you require 2 nights, then on a Friday and Saturday, your place is going to be booked. If you be mindful, if you are doing that, to make sure that you do open your bookings back up to at least a night to be able to book it. You're opening up your opportunity throughout the week, which is the hardest time to keep rented. I think is Tuesday through Thursday, and those are the nights that you want to specifically make sure that you're on a 1-night minimum to where you can book those one-off nights that you don't have when someone can't book 2 nights in a row. So I think doing so will help minimize those potential partiers and people that are coming to damage your property. Of course, it's inevitable. You never know who you're truly going to get. pay attention to the reviews. You can see for those who are renting your place. But if you have your instant book on, which I highly suggest for hosts to do, is to have your instant book on so you don't have to hold anybody up. If you don't have your instant book on, it gives people the opportunity to go and start searching at other Airbnbs or their VRBOs, and they might find something better. So having your instant book on allows somebody to book immediately, and they do take note on the person, like the guest rating. So you can't do instant book if you have a 3-star rating with Airbnb. So instant book does take note into who is renting your place, making sure that you're not accepting just anybody in there. I think the beauty of Airbnb is you're evaluating us as a host, but we're also evaluating you as a guest. So the reviews go both ways. So if you're not a good guest, you leave things behind, you destroy the place, you're less likely to be able to rent an Airbnb in the future. And Airbnb is very good about keeping up with someone who has multiple accounts. So you just can't go start up another Airbnb account. You have to verify with your ID, and the account can't be verified with one ID more than one time. So I think Airbnb tries to do what they can to crack down on those renting homes that don't have high ratings.
Yeah, no, that's excellent. That's excellent. As we moving along, I know we're running short on time. Let's just high level of like, what are some of your tips for like organizing those? I think you have given so many gems today. We might have already even talked about some of these things, but just organizing the logistics, because it just seems really overwhelming to be able to manage some of these logistical things that you have mentioned. Do you have any lasting tips that you can kind of hit us with?
So keep a list of items and the amenities that you need in your place. And always make sure you have a surplus of it. Toilet paper, extra bedding, extra towels. You just never know what's going to come. Someone may have spills or messes to clean up. So always being over prepared, overstocked is always going to and prevent less trips. Utilize technology that syncs with Airbnb is going to be life-changing for you as a Airbnb property manager or an Airbnb host. It's less hands-off, things are automated. So just making sure that you keep constant communication with guests, get those good reviews, you should have a good Airbnb experience.
No, excellent, excellent. You mentioned something a couple of minutes ago, and I think I hear it so often now that I would be amiss not to bring it up, is the idea of like arbitrage and being able to rent out these properties. Can you just high level kind of explain what that is, and then maybe explain how traditionally somebody else might do it?
Yeah, so arbitrage is when you take a long-term rental and you request that owner to allow you to rent it for short-term purposes. So you're still responsible for staging the unit. Most of the times they'll make an agreement with you to where you take care of most of these smaller maintenance items that can occur from Airbnb, such as we had a lot of toilet issues with Airbnbs. So an arbitrage renter would be responsible for those expenses. You pay the utilities still for the property. However, you don't have to consume the expense of owning and putting the down payment on the property or paying the mortgage. I think some of the benefits of that is you don't have to, it's a lower startup cost. If you're purchasing your own home, yes, you own that asset, which I think is greater in the long run for you, especially if you're in an area that's appreciating, an area that would also convert back to a long-term rental if need be. So you get those benefits of the long term, but if you're doing arbitrage, it's very good for someone who just wants to try it out and get their feet wet and see if this is something that they want to do and can manage. So with that, you're just put on a contract with the owner of the home. You make your agreements for a short-term rental.
Yeah, well, that's excellent. I mean, I think thing to keep in mind is like you still, any given day, the responsibility is if you get 2 bookings or you get 30 bookings, you're on the hook for that rent payment, right? So,
Still
but
gotta pay the rent.
still got to pay the rent. But that what you said is true. It's like that idea that you don't have to have the right amount of credit that it takes to get the house or the down payment that you need for the house. But you can get started today, right? Which is
Mhm.
But I think something that I always say is like, but that doesn't mean that you don't utilize an expert like Alexa or somebody that understands what she just explained. Because even for myself, sometimes it sounds like a foreign language. Alexa, any final thoughts before we shut it down here that you can leave us with?
I'll just say keep the experience in mind. Whenever you do start the Airbnb, make sure it's something that you're comfortable with staying in, somewhere you want to put your grandma or your parents in. Enjoy your own experience, and that way others will enjoy it back.
Oh, excellent. I'm really thankful and I'm really blessed to be able to have you here. Thank you for, just being able to, I know it's been last minute, but you dropped a lot of dimes today. I mean, it was really helpful to understand the experience of an Airbnb, as well as just the logistics in and out to be able to be successful in it. So Alexa, if you want to give them your contact information and anything else.
Absolutely. So Alexa Lomax on Facebook. My email address is alexalomax.rei@gmail.com. Hit me up if you have any further questions.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Sterling
Thank
Davis
you.
with Ethosity Property Management and Investhouse. We thank you for joining us today. Thank you, Alexa. And please subscribe to our YouTube so we can grow our subscribers. Thank you.
Thanks, Sterling.
Thank you.